Afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome. My name's Andrew Harvey. I'm the CEO of VMA Group. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. I am going to talk very slowly, just for the next minute or two, just to give everyone enough time to join the call this afternoon. Another hot topic for one of our webinar discussions. We have lots of people joining this afternoon to listen. So as I say, I'm just going to talk for a minute or two, bit of a preamble before we get stuck into introducing our speakers and having a proper conversation. So as I say, my name's Andrew Harvey. I'm the CEO of VMA Group. Thanks very much for joining this webinar this afternoon, which actually we're doing in partnership with Populo. Populo is one of our event partners that we've worked with a lot on different events since the start of the year. I'm sure many of you will know Populo as well. Obviously, they do lots of great things for the IC community. If you don't know them, do go and check them out. There's lots of interesting things there for you to look at, I'm sure. But obviously, a massive thank you as well to our guests this afternoon, to Samira, to Shan, and Mark. Thank you so much for joining and taking part in this conversation. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves in a second, just when we've got everyone settled on the call. So just again, a little bit of a preamble from me, just for another 60 seconds or so. Many of you listening would have been to a VMA Group webinar before. So great to see you again. Some of you won't. So it's great to see you for the first time. Why do we do them? Well, I've worked in internal comms recruitment now for over 20 years, and I've seen a lot of people move their career over that time, and I'm a massive advocate and believer in the value of continued professional development. And I think there's a huge link between CPD and those people that go on to continue strongly throughout the whole of their career and develop really successful careers, because the world around us continues to change. We know that tech is always changing, politics, the political environment, the economic environment is continuing to change. And I think if we don't change, the world might just pass us by a little bit. And I believe that the best way we can manage that change is by constantly learning and developing ourselves. So that's really what these webinars are about. We see them as a way to support everyone in the internal comms industry and the broader comms industry in terms of their own professional development and support. And what better way to learn than actually speaking to brilliant practitioners that are juggling these channels, juggling these challenges even every day of the week. So hopefully everyone listening today will take something useful away from this conversation. I suppose just as a reminder in terms of what we're talking about today, well, the context to it is that actually VMA Group, so the truth of it, VMA Group speaks to hundreds of IC professionals every week. And when we do that, certain topics begin to emerge from those conversations. And we hear the same thing time and time again. And actually one of those topics that has emerged really strongly over the last 6 months is the topic of trust. And as I say, if I had £1 every time someone mentioned the word trust, I would be a very rich man and probably be retired and not on this webinar. But that's not the case. So we're here talking about it today. We thought we'd talk about it today because so many people are talking about it. But what does it actually really mean? It's become a massive issue in the world of politics, in the world of business. There's a particular Institute of Internal Comms report which came out recently, which talks about trust being an all-time low. So we thought, let's get together and have a chat about it this afternoon. If you are listening in and you've got some questions that you'd like us to try and answer for you, or even some comments you'd like to make, do put them in the Q&A box at the bottom and we'll do our best to work our way through those. We are going to be recording this, or we are recording this session as well. So if you want to watch it back on our YouTube channel or on our website, please do. If you want to share it with any of your IC colleagues, then you're more than welcome to do that as well. So I think that's probably enough for me. I think we've got everyone settled and ready to begin. So I'm going to ask our lovely speakers again, and thank you to them, to introduce themselves to begin with. So perhaps, Samira, if we could start with you.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Good to be on this call. My name is Samira Ashraf, and I'm the Director of Internal Comms and Engagement at Smart DCC. Smart DCC is the data communications company that connects homes and businesses to the smart meter network. And I've been doing communications now for almost 30 years. So early part of my career was in external communications, and I did a lot of work in press offices, in the public and the voluntary sectors. And the latter part of my career has been in internal and change comms. That's me.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. Shan, let's come to you.
Hello, everyone. Really great to be here today as well. I'm Shan. I'm the Global Director for Internal Comms, but there's a bit of scope creep going on right now. So I seem to be doing more comms than just internal comms. I started in comms, oh my God, 25 years ago. It's been a really long time. And I have done a little bit of everything, a bit like Samira, moving from internal to external, PR, social media, back into internal. It's been a journey. And I've been looking forward to doing this session in particular today. So
Excellent. Thank you very much, Shan. And Mark, over to you.
Thanks, Andrew. Thank you, Shan and Samira. Yeah, really nice to meet everyone. Thank you for joining the call today. So my name's Mark Tulip. I'm currently the head of internal comms at Deloitte for our tax and legal business, which is obviously one of the big four professional services that you probably heard of. Prior to that, I did sort of 10 years in various different comms and internal comms roles in the UK government. And then, yeah, just really interested to talk about the topic of trust today. It's something that comes up on a daily basis, as Andrew says. So really looking forward to getting stuck into the conversation.
Brilliant. Well, thanks to you all. And I'm going to ask you all lots of different questions so we can try and cover a fair bit of ground. But I want to start actually by asking you all the same question to see what your individual take is on this. And I think it's really about the fact that we hear people talk about trust the whole time. Dare I say, people are throwing this word around every day of the week. Oh, trust this, trust this. But actually, in the context of internal comms and what you do, and maybe I'll come to Shan first on this. How would you define trust? How are you defining trust from an internal comms perspective in terms of what do you do and what you do and what it sort of means to your team and what you might be looking at? What does it mean to you?
for me, it means that when we communicate, when the CEO stands up and communicates on screen or in a town hall, what he or she says isn't just listened to, it's adopted. It's adopted, it's believed. You walk out that door and you feel the emotion that he or she is trying to convey in the message. You believe in it and you do what you've been asked to do. Conversely, you also feel like you can raise your hand and challenge and ask the questions, and you'll get heard because you trust in that leadership. You trust that they will create that safe space. So for me, trust, and without trust, there is no engagement. You have robots doing a job.
Yeah, that's a good point. Without trust, probably no or very low engagement. Okay, great. Samira, what do you think? How do you define it?
Interesting point actually that Shan made as well. So looking through that lens is quite an interesting one too. But I define trust as confidence that employees have that what their organisations are telling them is authentic, it's true, it's relevant. So for me, I think that's an interesting point there, just so that colleagues really have that confidence that what they are hearing from the organisation is something that is authentic. So, but conversely, as a result of that, the opposite side would be what I call the kind of the say-do gap. So it's the mismatch between people's lived experience of what they're going through versus what's being said and what's being communicated from the organisation. So it's that kind of misaligned perception. So I think that breeds mistrust if it's not in alignment.
Yeah. And would you agree that low trust equals low engagement as well? Is that
yes.
a direct link? Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Thank you for that. Mark, what are your thoughts? Slightly different or something similar?
Yeah, very similar to the other two. I think for me it's that what you say versus what you do gap. You're not going to build trust if you have that. So that really is what it boils down to for me. And I think it's really challenging in an organization to get people. Trust doesn't come for free. Basically, you've got to work it. You've got to earn it. And I think that's the main thing that I think about when I think about trust. And you can't lead a business really if you don't have if you don't have trust from your people, because as the others have mentioned, if what you're saying versus what you're doing is different, they catch on to that very quickly and they lose trust. So for me, that connection between communications and leadership is so critical, and you have to have that trust in the leadership. And the only way you can really do that is by building trust into your communications.
Yeah. And actually, Joe, I think on reflection, just hearing you all essentially agree with each other, I think it's good that there is that sort of common agreement as to what trust actually is and how you define it within the context of internal comms. Because I think without that clear understanding about what the issue is, then you're going to have all sorts of people going off sort of doing different things in different ways. So perhaps one of my first reflections is it's good that there's sort of common agreement there as to what it means and actually what the challenges actually are as a result of trust declining. But Shan, if I can come back to you then, so to build on this point, what's changed, do you think, about employee trust over the past few years? Why is it something that everyone's talking about in 2026, but maybe they weren't doing as much of that, talking about it as much in 2024, let's say, or even 2025?
I think you have to go back a bit. I think people have been talking about it for quite some time. So,
Right.
I mean, I think there are two things. I think there's a generational thing. I'll be honest, and I see this because I think I work with a lot of using the word younger isn't right, but you know what I mean, more entry level people in the world that I work in at the moment, in the business that I work in at the moment. And there's a very different vibe. You have to prove it to me for me to trust you. And I think there has been a shift in trust being assumed. I remember when I first started working and all those years ago and looking at the CEO at the time and going, I hung on every word, naive or not. But there has been a generational shift and I see it every single day. However, compounding that generational shift is what has happened probably before COVID, but I would say COVID has been the piece that has actually triggered, I believe, a loss of trust in the workplace. So, you've had COVID, you've had work from home, go back into the office, work from home. Now we want you all back in. Now we want you all back. And we have had, now we've got AI. We need you, human plus AI, or AI is going to do your job. Which one is it? There's been layoffs all along the line. Trust, I think we forget how the external forces shape how we feel generally and whether or not we are going to believe what is actually being said by our leaders. I do think there is a thing now where trust, as Samira and Mark has said, that it lives in the gap between what leaders say and actually what happens in the organization. But I do think it's also built peer to peer. I don't think you can remove that piece. And I think that's where that generational piece actually really comes alive.
Yeah. It's interesting that I say being in part being a generational thing. Do you see that in your own organization in some ways, or experience of working in previous organizations where you see different generations trusting in different ways? Have you got real examples of that?
Yeah. I mean, I see it all the time. I see it in, I run a TV show which is not a town hall. We call it that. It's not a town hall.
Right.
And it is the younger, and I'm going to say younger generation, Gen Y, who are very cynical in their approach, constantly challenging whether or not there is a script. And the CEO's he does not have a script. Whereas on the flip side, we have the millennials who are definitely, you can see it, definitely more trusting, definitely more forgiving as well. There is a switch. And I think that's quite exciting. I think that's quite interesting. And I don't think we should look at it in a negative way. I think we should think about actually what do we need to do more of, or perhaps even less of, to bring these people on the journey.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And Samira, then, so from your perspective, what do you think are just sort of building on that a little bit, just to see if there's any commonality, what do you think are the biggest threats to trust existing? What's going to erode trust most in organizations if things don't happen?
I mean, we've talked about it having a direct correlation to engagement. So eroding trust, I mean, that's a key point really, because trust is built up over time. So it's built up, through credibility over time. But the thing is that currency is, if it's lost, it's lost. So there's no currency like trust in a way, because once it is lost, it's lost very quickly, even though it takes so much time to build up. And again, going back to the point that Mark made, it's interesting that leaders play such a vital role in this. And I think some of the things that sometimes happen in terms of where they can become unstuck is they expect maybe the comms team to be their voice, when actually we're here to help them to articulate their own authentic voice. So I think that's key, is having that dissimulate that kind of distinction between the two. But in terms of, you know, what happens within organizations, I mean, low engagement, you know, you have managers effectively who probably don't have the headspace or are not equipped to deal with managing, you know, initiatives that are coming down the pipe, engagement initiatives, because they're dealing with the day-to-day, and yet they have such a powerful position in the organization because they are the ones that people within their team, you know, their teams look up to get their information. So I think if we don't make sure that leaders are equipped and managers are equipped to do what they need to do, I think that can have a real problem and can erode trust in organisations as well.
Yeah, brilliant. And Mark, maybe Mark, some thoughts from you on this. So if we're accepting that trust is dropping off, we've got some thoughts there from Shan as to Samira as to why it might be. You know, it's becoming, let's say, then a critical issue for organizations. Do you think that leadership teams are seeing it as a critical issue for organizations as well? So in the IC community, we're talking about it. But actually, do you think leadership is seeing it as a critical issue? Do they understand why it's become a critical issue?
Yeah, I think they do. I mean, I think going back to the point I made at the start, I think if you don't, then you're going to lose your audience and you're not going to be able to lead. You're not, you need trust. You need people to trust in you to be able to lead. So I would hope they are. That certainly the leaders that I've worked with, I see that as an increasing issue. And for me, I think it is an issue within work, but it's almost like a broader issue across society, really. I think people are distrusting not just internal communications, but all of the messages they're receiving. And if you look at kind of the environment that we're in, you know, we're bombarded by more messages and more information than ever, which makes it really difficult to work out what to trust and where to look for trusted sources of information. And then even just, in society more largely, like people just are trusting less institutions and organizations. And there's just that feeling that institutions maybe aren't there to help the public as much as they have in the past. And I think that comes back to Shan's point about generational shifts in how people perceive trust. And I think as communicators, it's really important that we have that at the back of our mind and see, I think that's an uphill battle that we'll be fighting for a while yet. And a great example of that is if you look at like the UK political landscape, which I came out of 3 years ago, but trust in government and politicians is lower than ever. So, you know, that is a symptom of that. And then I think, again, as Shan mentioned, the technology, you know, we're moving into a time where it's almost indistinguishable, right? To be able to tell between what's real and what's not because of how much AI has moved on. And I think that just creates, to be honest, a healthy skepticism around in people, and people are questioning whether they should trust something. So if you get that wrong in an organization, you're kind of you've got one hand tied behind your back really, because you're fighting against all these external factors. So you need to really make sure trust is front and center of your communications in order to make sure it cuts through all of that.
Yeah. I'm just going to ask you another quick question building on that. Do you think then that trust is in many ways won or lost at the leadership level in terms of, you know, what they say, what they do, how they act, irrespective of what a comms team can do around them, you know?
I think if a leader gets everything wrong all of the time, then yes. But I think we as communicators are definitely there to help them with that. And I think one of the issues with or challenges as a leader of certainly a large and complex organization is sort of understanding how people are feeling and where that trust is and if there is that trust gap. Yeah. And I think we are in a unique position of being able to help them with that. And it comes back, you know, to sort of two-way communications. If you just send your messages out and you don't test and see how they're feeling, it's going to be really difficult to judge how the amount of trust that people feel towards the organization. So I think, yes, we are, you can't, comms can't solve all the problems, but we can definitely help with it. And if we see that happening, we'd probably be one of the first people in the business to be able to clock that and then sort of advise the leader and help them. Even with, you know, obviously we can help them with their communications, but we can also help sort of advise them on business decisions based on how communications is landing. And I think that's a key part of building trust as well.
Yeah.
I think another key
Go on.
point on that, sorry to interject, it's
No,
really
no.
interesting just to point in on that is the whole thing about that you've mentioned around building and creating a two-way relationship, because I think that's key, is enabling
Yeah,
colleagues in an organisation to be able to have that opportunity to influence decisions as well, and the importance of them being heard and listened to. So I think also that's really key.
can I just ask you then, Samira? Oh, go on, Shan. Go on, please do. Yeah. No, go on, go on.
There was something I wanted to bring back in. So at the beginning, I was talking about the importance of peer-to-peer, how trust is now built peer-to-peer. And I think actually this is one of the ways out of the trust conundrum that we face, because if trust is living between peer and peer, who are the influencers in the organization? You know, and if how can they help support? They may not be leaders, but how can they also support building back the trust in the organization? And I think that is a really, really important piece, because communication no longer flows top to bottom. It's your influences in the organization that actually shape the communication that your leader has put out. So I think actually there is something that we can really help our leaders with, is how do you activate those influencers, and actually how do we support those influencers through the organization?
Yeah. Can I ask, just as you're chatting, Sean, is there anything that you do that, how does trust directly influence employee engagement activities in your experience or your organization? Are there certain things now that you're doing because you're mindful of, say certain people at certain generations not trusting as much? So if you sort of address the way you're doing your comms to look at that.
Yeah, I've spent, well, I haven't been here for very long. It feels like I've been here for years. I've been here for 18, 19 months.
Right.
I'm at S3. I didn't say that before. It's a recruiter firm. We have 2,400 people between the age range of about 20 to about 45, max 50. I think I'm one of the oldest.
Yeah.
And trust fell really quickly in my early time that I was here in the first few months. And it fell because on the one hand, we were telling our people everything's great, business is going great. And then all of a sudden we announce a profit warning.
Right.
And so you can imagine 2 weeks before the profit warning, everything's great. It was on town hall.
Right.
Then you have the profit
Yeah.
warning. And with the profit warning came the announcement of cost optimization. And you can see, therefore, what would happen to the trust levels. Very quickly after that, there was an engagement survey. And the engagement survey, there, I implanted a question about trust, a
Right.
specific question about trust, not just do you trust your leadership on, the direction of the organization? Do you trust your CEO?
Mm.
And the question was, it didn't come out very positive. So
Right.
I was able to have the conversation with Exco and very openly say, we need to change the way you do things.
Yeah.
And so we have put in place I wouldn't say it's groundbreaking. Nothing's groundbreaking here.
Mm.
It's actually just doing the basics and doing them well. So
Yeah.
ensuring that if they are having a level of infighting over a topic, it doesn't come out of the room in which they're discussing it.
Yeah.
That's really important, and that's coaching that we can give. We have access to our leaders. Let's give that coaching, because there is nothing more unsettling than Exco not agreeing on a topic and
Yeah.
coming out of a room and making sure everybody knows, and undermining each other. So that's one thing that I have put in place. And how have
Right.
I supported that? I make sure they have a messaging deck. They have it. They have it all the
Right.
time. They use it all the time. I'm in the Excos. I'm able to support them with how are they going to talk about this afterwards. But they're not just them, also their direct reports, because that is
Right.
also really important. So just really simple things like that. The other thing that I have done is, I mentioned it before, is that I've introduced S3 TV. The reason why I introduced S3 TV was because very soon after the calamity of the downgrade and the mixed messaging, people stopped attending the town halls. They just
Right.
stopped. And it was actually really interesting. And why would they? Why would they attend if actually they're going to be fed a bunch of lies, right?
Right.
So I went out to the organization and I asked, and I ran focus groups, and I've dug deep into what is it you really want. And I've created a TV show, and it is unscripted and it is live. And what you see is what you get. It is not pretty. There's nothing pretty about this thing.
Right.
But what we do have is live questions from people The CEO has no idea what's coming. He doesn't even know what I'm presenting on the show that day. And that is what we do. And we bring in people from different parts of the world to support this. But the whole point is that we're moving from this cloak and dagger type of feeling that we had, and it's going to take time, but we are moving slowly from that into where we can, we will be as transparent as we can. The other thing that I've done, final thing, is that I have said very clearly, if you do not know the answer, you say that.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, in this world of agentic and AI, it's really important in particular because there is no roadmap for agentic. Nobody has the answers. We don't know what it's going to look like in the next 24 months, do we? No one knows.
Yeah.
So why don't you just say that? Because owning up and saying, hey, I don't know right now, but you know what? When I do, I will let you know is far more powerful and will build credibility in the long term than making something up that you're going to have to backtrack on in 6 months.
Some good examples of things you're doing differently. And I like the unscripted TV. I'd love to see an episode, but the unscripted TV sounds great. I'm going to ask.
I think also it's.
Just to interject there, the same question, Samira. Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, it's just a really interesting point on that because I read recently, I think you've all come across the recent internal comms index report that came out, and I was really quite surprised to see that that basically engagement and trust has gone down in leaders to its lowest level, and I think it's gone down 9 points from last year, and I think it's just over half, or it's just under half of UK employees now don't have very much trust in their CEO. So I thought that was quite an interesting point, just to tag on to your point, Shan, earlier, because it kind of correlates a little bit with what you've said and what you've experienced too, which is quite an interesting data point.
Definitely, I think it's a great data point. I say it really underlies the issue and obviously why we're talking about it. But actually, maybe the same question to you, Samira, and I'll ask you the same one, Mark, in terms of, given that we know trust is an issue, and I know it's going to be different for different organisations, perhaps, let's say, depending on the profile of the employee that you've got. But is there anything specific, Samira, that you are doing differently? Maybe not because you've got a massive trust issue, but you're just aware that that might become an issue because it's going to be an issue for everyone. Is there anything you're doing differently in your approach to your comms?
In terms of what we're doing at the moment, we are going through a huge amount of change in the organisation and moving to a new licensee in November. And what we've kind of introduced, working really closely with the people team, is prior to a year and a half ago, we didn't have a staff consultative forum, so we now have basically a team in place that are looking at that. So we found that has helped to really build trust in the organisation because we didn't have one before. So that's really important to kind of elicit views and concerns from colleagues in the organisation and then feed them through to leadership. So that's very much that two-way kind of communication and listening going on. So we rely quite heavily on that group as well, which has been a godsend really. But we're also really lucky and probably one of the few organisations that has a really, really strong CEO in the organisation and very much leads by example. And, in our recent surveys that we've held, our CEO has come out quite strongly, favourably by colleagues, because they really do see that they've got a clear direction of the company. They have confidence in the future of where we're going. So we're really in that lucky position. And I find that the leader and tone from the top is really key there, and ensuring that leaders have that strong capability. So we're doing quite a lot of work with leaders. And we've introduced a series of different events purely for our top leaders to ensure that they are behind all of the messaging that we want to convey within the organisation, and that they are equipped to be able to answer any questions and really sort of work through with them. So that's kind of been our focal point, really. It's kind of working at that leadership level, building that leadership capability. And we've had really strong support from our CEO on that.
Yeah. Do you say to your CEO and your leaders, actually, we need to do more of this because in society, generally trust is dropping and we don't want to fall into that category? We're doing this, so you're coaching them as to why you're doing it, but particularly highlighting the fact that trust is becoming an issue? Are you having that conversation with them?
Absolutely. I think, part of our role is ensuring that we provide that external landscape, what's going on in the organisation, providing them with early insight and intel. I mean, this is why it's really important to, the importance of data and making sure that we've got that empirical data that we can share back with our leadership team and the CEO. And I also find that it helps to be more influential when you're building that relationship with your leadership and with your CEO in particular, because I think if you can insert yourself to help solve problems and fix their problems, you're more easily listened to, and it can help build trust and respect. And we all know that different stakeholders respond differently, but I found that by demonstrating quite strong commercial acumen, business knowledge backed up with communication expertise, I think that helps to really elicit support and commitment from the leadership team. So that's kind of my bit of advice in terms of how you'd go about kind of working with the leadership team, is to have those three things in place and to really demonstrate those three things, because it does provide a groundswell of goodwill then on that relationship.
Definitely good advice for sure. And actually, Mark, what coming to you, in terms of, again, Deloitte, massive organization, are there things you're doing differently, knowing that trust could be an issue?
Yeah, definitely. And it's so interesting to hear what's happening in other organizations and just hear similar challenges, which I guess isn't that much of a surprise. But I think especially some of the stuff that Shan was saying, for us, like, we've really pivoted to a lot more live content. So we do a lot of live webinars where we can sort of put our leaders on the spot, really. And that involved having a conversation with them when I started in role, and kind of bringing up this issue of trust and sort of flagging that the only way you can really tackle that is by being authentic and being genuine. And a key part of that is sort of putting yourself on the spot and answering questions in the moment. And also another thing that we've really made an effort to do and really focused on is allowing people to be able to ask questions anonymously. And that hasn't always been the case in other places that I've worked. Like there's a, you've got to weigh that up. And we found that when we started doing that now, so in all of our webinars, people can ask questions anonymously, which obviously, if there's a topic that is of importance or people are really pick up on, you get a deluge of questions. We also commit to answering all of those questions. If we don't answer them live on the call, we'll pick them up and answer them after. And that, to be honest, that's a real heavy lift for the leadership. And if there's a topic that creates a lot of questions, it's a lot of work to answer those questions. But what it does do is mean that you know exactly how your people feel. And if you've got an environment where people can ask a question, but their name is there, you do, in my experience, you do get kind of a filtered version of what's happening. Whereas if you have that anonymous option, you get the truth from your people. And also, even with that, it's like if you just start with that, it builds up over time because people don't necessarily trust that it's anonymous. But then when they see that that's happening over time, it's the only way I think that you can really get a feel for how people are actually feeling out there and the levels of trust. So I think that's something that we've really focused on, and it's hard. It's been a lot of work, and it's a bit of a gamble, but it's paid off for us in Deloitte, certainly in the area that I work in.
Yeah. And do you know what, actually, thinking about everything you said, I've got another question I'm going to ask all three of you, actually. I hadn't planned to do this, but I think I will ask you, because I think one of the things that Shan has said, Samira, and you've built on this as well a little bit, Mark, this idea of transparency, right? So, and it's something we hear a lot. Oh, the leaders aren't transparent. Then they said one thing happened, and then trust is lost. But I think there's a balance, right? So imagine you're in your organization, it's going through change. There may be some job losses as a result of the change, or there may be not. And it's going to take a few months to really work that out. Are you really transparent? And do you say in the town hall, look, we are going through this change. Actually, do you know what? There could be like a 20% redundancy, but actually we're not sure yet. It's going to take another 12, 16 weeks to work out. Or some people say, look, we don't want to worry 20% of our staff because actually that's going to affect productivity. It might actually impact their mental health. Actually, from a responsible perspective, we don't want to say that because we don't want to cause people to be scared because it might not happen. That is a transparency dilemma, one could say. where do you draw the line? I'm going to come to you first, Samira. Where do you draw the line when it comes to transparency?
That's a very tricky question, isn't it? And I think it's dependent on an individual situation and what we're looking at. I mean, you've given an example, so we can go with that really. I think there is a fine line. I think in terms of over communicating, not communicating at the right time, I think timing is really key here, because like you say, you don't want to worry the 20% of people potentially, but also you're worrying 100% of people effectively, because those other 80 aren't sure which 20% it will be. So I think that can cause a little, put the cat amongst the pigeons in that situation. I think we would probably handle, the way that I would probably think about this is just to say that, there are some changes that will be happening, and we will be sharing when we know further what we'll be doing around those changes. I think it's important to engage the right stakeholders as well. So we mentioned earlier the CRF in our organisation, which is a staff consultative forum, and ensuring that we get feedback from those people as well, because they very much have their eyes and ears to the ground. And also you're building a strong relationship with that group so that they feel that they are invested and have some level of trust in this. So for me, it's about ensuring that we don't make these decisions in isolation. We always seek advice, and we ask different stakeholders that have a play in or a stake in this, and be able to kind of play that back, because I think you get a groundswell then of goodwill in terms of them being the message carriers as well, and them being equipped and being in a position where, should there be any sort of uncertainty or any questions or queries, that you're actually enabling those groups to be able to help and assist with that. So that's probably my very quick and dirty way of addressing that without knowing too much more about the situation.
It sounds like a very sensible approach to me. I'm wondering whether Mark or Shan would do anything different. Shan, what would you do? Would you do different? Where do you draw on the line at transparency when giving advice?
I've been in this. I've actually been asked the question: should we communicate? And I just went, you know what? We need to understand the legal piece here first, please, because actually that is where we need to start. I need to understand the legal implications, because sitting in a global seat means, if we communicate this, what are the implications in countries where we may have work councils, for example? What about the notification piece that you have to do in a legal framework in certain organizations? What could slow this up? What could cause us to actually have to spend out more money on these job losses than we actually would have had to? And I think that's where the conversation needs to shift. It's not about transparency anymore. It's actually about, and it sounds really awful, it is about the money. It is about the cost to the organization. And what does that cost mean? It's not just cost on the bottom line, it's reputation. It's all of these other things that lead to costs, and that's how I answered the question when I was asked this. And I was asked this when we were going through this whole, cost optimization piece. They let the cat out of the bag, but obviously everyone wanted to know the numbers. But you can't do that. A bit like Samira said, it is not our decision as comms people of whether or not we do this. What we need to do is gather all the information, but I would always start at the legal point.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting point, isn't it? Because it adds a different level of complexity, doesn't it, in terms of what you can and can't do. It says, as good communicators, we perhaps all share a similar view that, the right thing is to do X, but then actually the law, the union, someone says, no, you can't do that. And actually, we think about organizations all across the world, and the sort of cultural element of having a conversation in the Middle East versus in Europe versus in North America or South America. There's these added complexities as well, I guess, isn't there?
Yeah, and also your performance at the time. I mean, if your performance is lagging, like you say, you don't want to decrease productivity because your performance is already lagging. That has, another knock-on effect. So there are a lot of things to consider before you go, let's all be transparent. I think there's transparency and doing it in the right way, and then there's not.
Yeah. I get that. Mark, what do you think? Where would you draw the line at transparency? Again, Deloitte, very complex organization, big global organization. Pick up on any things that
I mean, I sort of agree with everything that's been said. I think you've got to get that balance right. You've got to remember you're sort of working within a business. A business has to run. If you say too much, if you say everything, then it can actually hurt people down the line. So you're kind of constantly balancing that. So I think as long as, and again, sorry, it comes back to sort of earning that trust. So if you have in the past handled things in the right way, in transparent way, people will trust that you maybe can't share that information now, and you kind of build that trust up in the bank. So when you do have these difficult topics that you need to cover, people know that you're not withholding it for a particular reason. So yeah, so I think obviously it's good to be as transparent as possible, but you're operating within a business framework, a legal framework, as Shan says. So you've got to kind of weigh that up, and really you say as much as you can. That's going to have the best, the right impact on the business and also the people in the business. And if you come at it from that perspective, I do think people acknowledge that and see that as you go forward.
Yeah. Well, I think it's an interesting question, which we're not going to get down to an answer on today. But I think just picking up on your different points of view, I think is interesting. I'm sure for those people that are listening in very different organisations as well, say culturally, and where unions and things are part of it. So I'm going to move on from transparency, but I am going to come back actually, I think, to Samira, because I think one of the things you talked about is this kind of what I would call an employee council that you've set up there. And one of the things that we pick up on when we talk about trust with people is also this concept of listening and reacting to that listening is building trust, and the way we listen to people now has changed. I think we talked about surveys. Just going back then, I suppose, to what you've been doing with this employee council, for what I know you've called it something different, but that's what I would call it. Is listening to staff, and the way you do that, is that changing how trust is developed, won or lost?
Yes, that's right. And I should just clarify that the employee council that we're referring to is actually is HR have set that up because it is a requirement.
Right, okay.
So but we work very closely as part of that process. So I just wanted to just clarify that point. But in terms of listening to colleagues, I think that was obviously a really big thing, because our organisation is quite small. So we're just shy of 700 people and we're UK based. So we are quite a small organisation in comparison to Shan's and Mark's organisation. So it's actually probably less cumbersome when you're thinking about processes around listening. So we do have a biannual survey that we do. And it's a point in which time that we can actually just check the pulse of the organisation. So we do traditional surveys. However, we also have in moments opportunities where people can feedback as well. So we utilize that quite a lot. But also I think the important thing here as well within our organization is ensuring that, and again, going back to managers, making sure that they are experienced enough to be able to understand, whilst they're dealing with their operational day-to-day, that they are also in a position to understand that they can kind of lift their head above the parapet to really kind of understand how to kind of motivate the teams, how to kind of get questions through teams, and then basically feed them up that way through the chain. So we do quite a lot of work at that level, and that's something that is quite different to maybe a couple of years ago when we weren't really focusing on that. But we're finding that by putting that emphasis and putting that investment into middle managers and also the leadership, as I mentioned previously, we are starting to see that there is that the dial has been moved around trust in the organisation, which is obviously coming through from the traditional survey. So those are the types of things that we're looking at, and mentioned before, having visible leadership, making sure that they're equipped, sharing insights more quickly with people so that they can see, and they, again, building trust that way to show that and demonstrate that what we're hearing from people, we're actually doing something about it where possible. Yeah. So that's also playing into how we're trying to turn the dial on trust in the organisation.
Yeah. And actually, you've delivered a phrase there which sort of feeds into one of the things I wanted to explore, which you're doing things now that you didn't do a few years ago. And that comes back to what I said at the start, didn't it, really, in terms of to keep up to date with the pace of change and things that are happening, we have to constantly do things differently. And it's great to see you doing things differently that you didn't do a couple of years ago. And obviously, one of the things that we're all faced with that is changing, that wasn't, it's changing at pace and changing every year, let alone every 2 years, is AI. So we're not going to be able to get through this conversation without having a conversation about AI, because it is one that relates to trust. I think Shan, you might have even mentioned it earlier, so I'll maybe come to you on this one. So, employees trusting AI generated copy and content is, I'm sure everyone listening has talked about this because it is a massive conversation. But let's just address it for a second here. How do IC teams make sure they are using AI to generate content in a way in which employees are still going to be able to trust it? It still seems human. It still seems authentic. Any particular views? If you can solve this answer for everyone that's listening in the IC world, that'd be great. So what's your thoughts on this?
I'm going to try and keep my bias outside this. It's very difficult to. So I love AI. I love it because it has made my life faster, easier in so many ways, right? I can now digest huge spreadsheets in minutes, which used to take me days. I can develop, and I think this is the difference, develop a narrative myself, not with the help of AI, and then spin out 1,000 different versions of that same narrative for different audiences by using AI in minutes. Should people trust those versions? Yes, they should, because actually the original version was created with myself, my stakeholders in a room where we brainstormed this out. We have spoken to people who could be impacted, influencers, da 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 da. I don't think it means that you can't trust the content. I think it's just how that initial piece is done. I'm not a fan of let's do a campaign, let's create everything in AI, including the change narrative. I'm not a fan of that at all. But what I am a fan of is using AI to make life lighter, especially at a time when many of us are seeing cuts to our budgets, cuts to the sizes of our teams, and we have to work faster and at pace. So I think that's my answer.
Yep, I like it. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm going to build on that a little bit because, and I'm going to come to you, Mark, on this one. I think there is, maybe this is a personal point of view, maybe I'm right or maybe I'm wrong, but there's this challenge of AI generated content, which there's an element of distrust around, but almost coming back to what you said, Shan, about stuff that's staged and then having this kind of unscripted TV show, the stuff that's kind of polished, overly polished, or perhaps less authentic. So, Mark, I'm sort of coming to you, maybe in my head, rightly, when I had this view of Deloitte that's super polished. I can imagine your budgets for TV and everything you do are huge compared to some of the people that are listening. And there is, I'm sure, a chance that everything that comes out from Deloitte is super, super, super polished. Now, that's not AI generated stuff, but it's, it is so polished that people might think, oh, is this person real? I've heard this before. And that then lessens trust. Any issues with over polishing, do you think, let alone AI?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. Obviously, Deloitte's a massive organization. It has a lot of budget for things like that, although it's not always the case that I can get a hold of it. But I suppose, in a way, by sort of bringing it down to the basics, and it helps you cut through that. I think definitely comms content can be over polished and be too. What it comes down to then is people see through that very quickly and they see the style of the substance. So I think there's definitely still a place for polished, well-made communications, especially in an organization like Deloitte, because you're competing against lots of that. But what really needs to stand out is the quality of the content and the authenticity of it. And I know we probably sound like a broken record, sort of coming back to that, but that is really important. So yes, it can be far too polished, but my view is that you're better off keeping it sort of keeping to the basics, keeping it grassroots, and it will work better. And there's in this world of AI, every piece of written communications now, people are going to sort of think, has that been written by AI or has that been written by a person?
Yeah.
A live webinar is actually one of the very few things where for certain the leader has taken the time to sort of have that conversation and has committed that time, and they're fully committed to their answer because it's not being written by a comms person, it hasn't been written by AI. And I just
Yeah.
think one of the challenge for us in the world of communications is that because, as Shan says, like AI can just produce content so quickly. In Deloitte, and I've seen this in every organization that I've worked in, you get the formal communications layer that we all lead and work on, but then you get this kind of subculture of communications that somebody just kind of getting hold of the email list, or people are always trying to manage communications themselves. And I think having access to AI creates a bigger problem around that because there's so much more content, there's so much more noise, and anybody can sort of like create huge swathes of communication and pump it out into the organization. So you're competing against that as the sort of formal communications channel. So you have to bear that in mind. So I think AI makes our lives easier in the sense that we can organize content and create content quicker, but it makes it more difficult in that other people can do that as well. So it increases the noise in the environment, makes it more challenging for you to get your messages to cut through.
Yeah, I agree. And we've covered a lot already in this conversation. I knew, and we all knew, and everyone listening knew, we'd never get to the bottom of it in the space of 60 minutes. But we do have one question actually. We've got lots of people commenting, actually agreeing with what people have said, what you've been saying, which I think is great. Because again, we've got this common point of view about what the challenges that we're dealing with, and hopefully, as a community, an IC community, we'll have a common way to work through it. But I'm going to pick on this question actually because it is something that's also going to be very relevant. So I think everyone knows that the job market at the moment is quite challenging for a lot of organisations. Say Shan works for a recruitment company. Lots of people working in internal comms will have been involved in some kind of redundancy program, or even seen some of their colleagues leave. And actually, one of the questions is about rebuilding trust rather than losing trust. How is trust lost? I suppose there's a suggestion here that if an organisation has had to lay off staff, and maybe it's had to do that for very genuine reasons, there may be a sense of a loss of trust that, well, is it going to happen again, or trust has just been diminished in some ways. I'd be interested to see what you both think, just brief, or what all three of you think briefly, as to how would you go about rebuilding trust after you've been through, and it could be a layoff, or it could be some other thing that's gone wrong. You sort of mentioned profit warnings after telling everyone things have gone well, but maybe just in a sort of a sentence or two, how would you go about rebuilding trust? I see, Shan, you've come off mute first, so I'm going to come to you first. How would you rebuild trust?
I'd put the leadership into the fire. I'd put them out there. They have to. You can't hide in your rooms. You can't hide around your board table. You need to go out there and you need to listen to what people have to say, and you need to take it on the chin, and you need to reiterate. You need to keep reiterating those key messages, but you need to acknowledge and say, we could have done better. You're right, we could have done better. And I think that is more powerful than any comms campaign you can ever do. Let them be human and let other people be human back. Because if you can create that space, I think that's the most powerful thing.
Great. What about you, Samira? What would you do to rebuild trust?
Well, actually, I believe it or not, I was going to say exactly the same thing.
Right.
So it's really interesting that you said that. You came off mute before me as well, but it's about addressing the elephant in the room. So for me, it was always a case of, never get the leadership team to kind of, share success stories or anything like that, and get peer to peers communicating that, because it's more authentic and people are more likely to listen to that. But anything that needs addressing, which is the elephant in the room, then get the leadership team to do that and put them on the spot to address those questions, because that, I think, really does help to move the dial on building trust in an organization.
So we've got two people agreeing there. Same thoughts. Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more, but I think just one thing that I'll sort of add to it is that I think people are open to trusting their organization. Like, you want to work somewhere that you trust. So whilst everybody has that skepticism and quite rightly. But I think if you do it right, I think people are open to it. So after a challenge like that an organization's gone through, I think people will be looking to, they'll want to see that trust rebuild and doing exactly like Shan and Samira have said. If you do that, I think it would go down well at that time. And it's not easy, it's an uphill battle. But yeah, people want to work in places that they trust. They want to trust their employers. So if you do it right, then people will be receptive to it, I think.
Yeah.
I believe, anyway, I hope as well.
Yeah. Reads. Okay, brilliant. So we've covered a lot of ground today. So we're never going to have a chance to cover it all. I'd like to leave us and everyone listening with, I suppose, one final thought from each of you. Just imagine for a moment that you have been parachuted into a new organization that you've not worked with before as a comms consultant. And you're meeting the CEO, and the CEO says, look, we've got 500, 600 staff. Trust seems to be a real issue. Everyone says to me that trust is a real issue in this business. You stepped in on day one, you're having a cup of tea with the CEO, trust is the issue. What's the one thing that you say to them, look, well, we need to start with doing X? And it may be something you've already said, but it's just as a key takeaway in the last couple of minutes, it's that one piece of advice. It could be the CEO. Maybe we've got someone listening who's early on in their career. They're new to internal comms. They've got a few years experience, not as much as you, but they know trust is an issue. You know, where do you say to them and say, this is the one thing you should think about and start with when it comes to trust? So, Mark, I'm going to come back to you. What's the one bit of advice? And there's going to be lots of bits of advice, but what's the one bit you would give?
Yeah, sure. I'll keep it short. I would say be authentic and do what you say. And it's easy to say that. I know it doesn't necessarily play out that in practice, and you might need to build that relationship before you do that, but you need to get to the stage where you can say to that leader, you have to do what you say, you've got to be authentic, and that you have to be able to challenge them on that.
And do you know what? I think that's a good point. It's a simple point, but we know lots of leaders that aren't authentic and don't necessarily do what they say. So actually, if people did the basics, then actually it wouldn't be a bad thing. Samira, what's the one thing you would say?
I would say, what's the data telling us? And really understand that. So it could be a perception. It could be that the leader, the CEO, thinks that's the case. But you know, what does that look like? And so really getting under the skin of what that mistrust looks like within the organisation. Is it a general feeling? Are there pockets of mistrust in an organisation? Because I think that helps you then to sort of solve or put some intervention in place that will help to address that. So that would be my go-to.
Brilliant. Love a bit of data. Good stuff. And Shan, what would you say?
I would do exactly as Samira said. I would want to understand why. I'd ask why. How do you know this, and what is supporting it, and why do you think? But then I'd ask I think the most important question was, what's the business impact of this?
Right.
Because you can't measure. It's very difficult to measure. This is a very difficult thing to measure, but you can measure the impact of something like this. And I think you need a level of a KPI there to help you track whether or not trust is improving.
Brilliant. Well, we have achieved what I hope we would achieve today. We have covered a fair bit of ground. We've brought together a bunch of people, including your great selves, to talk about a topic which is of huge interest to a lot of people today. And hopefully we've given everyone and ourselves some things to think about and to take away from this course. So we're not going to solve these problems overnight, but if we can learn one or two things and listen into one or two things that other people are doing, I think it's a really positive thing. So I'm one of those people that hates meetings that run over. I always chair meetings, or I try to, that finish on time. So we have just 60 seconds left for me to say, firstly, a massive thank you to all three of you, to Shan, to Samira, and Mark, for taking part today. Honestly, I really do appreciate it. And I'm sure for everyone listening in, I can see all the comments coming through. I know people do as well. So a massive thank you to you. A massive thank you to Populo as well for helping us with the event today and supporting us with that. And also a big thank you to everyone that's listened in and made it such a great conversation to have. So I will wish you well for the rest of your day. Good luck with your trust challenges and your internal comms challenges. I'm sure there will be many. We will be running many more of these webinars going forward. So please do join us again, listen to us again. And if you'd like to take part, please do let us know. But Shan, Samira, Mark, thank you once again. And we'll see you all soon. Many thanks.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.